Happy midday. It's a beautiful October day. Thank you for coming inside. Welcome to the Great Books mini lectures. Before we start, I'd like to thank the CoLab staff, video production as always, the marketing team. I'd like to thank my partner, Professor Maureen Fitzpatrick. We've organized this series in some of the past, and if you get an interest, there are some past lectures on our YouTube channel that you can check out, and we are sure today's is going to match up with the brilliance and the interest of all of those. So thank you for being here. To begin, Susan Johnson is Professor of Engineering Technology. She's been full-time faculty member here at the college for over 30 years. That merits some applause. Absolutely. During her tenure, Susan has taught at least 13 different courses in engineering, CAD drafting, civil engineering technology, computer science, and physics. She adds that all three of her children attended JCCC. Two of them have degrees from here and also worked as student employees while at the school. Professor Johnson holds a Bachelor of Science and Master of Science degrees in civil engineering from the Ohio State University. In addition, and in her words, quote, "Many moons ago, I was employed as a design engineer at a major Kansas City engineering firm and am still a licensed professional engineer." Outside of her time at the college, Susan has a passion for international travel. She and her husband have visited over 70 countries on 6 continents. That is quite a record. Today's lecture will cover Louis L'Amour's The Walking Drum, published in 1984. We asked Susan why she chose this title, and she said that in 1988, her husband-to-be introduced her to the L'Amour books. He was gone away on a job assignment for about 6 months, and she pretty much just read Louis L'Amour books while he was away, almost a book a day or a book every 2 days. This was obviously before the internet. Some of us remember that. Some of us also remember the price of long-distance phone calls. So put simply, this was a chance for her to stay connected to him. And maybe we'll find out a little bit of that personal and maybe a little bit of history and a little bit about the walking drum. Thank you all for being here. Professor Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today and sharing part of your day with me and those out in Zoom land also. As I was thinking about, what book to pick and doing this, which is basically a book report, I was thinking, boy, when was the last time I did a book report? And it took me a while, but I thought it had to be in the 1970s. And I'm pretty sure it was in Miss Spear's 9th grade English class. So let's see if I can do Miss Spear proud today. She would appreciate that. The Walking Drum by Louis L'Amour. Louis L'Amour is a very, very famous author, right? He is very prolific, wrote many, many books. And he wrote for many, many people. So let's first talk about books for the masses. Right? This is not for a niche audience, right? His books were very, very, very widely read. And I'm one of the masses. I mean, I'm not a literary giant, that type of thing. When I read a book, I read for entertainment, generally for fiction books. I read for plot, right? Sometimes if things aren't going quite as fast as I think they should be, I kind of skim a page or two. I'm reading. That's how we of the masses, we of the non-English major types, that's how we read books, right? So Louis L'Amour speaks to me, right? Because Louis L'Amour books, for the most part, right, are what we would say easy reading. There aren't words that I don't know what they mean in them. It's very direct type of writing, very concise, very plot driven. So they're great books for me. I really enjoyed his books. But I am one of the masses. So it was very hard for me to pick a book because I've read many, many books, not just Louis L'Amour books, but many, many books. So I can't go forward without a little bit of Louis L'Amour. He very prolific, right? And we'll get more into that. But well over 100 books he wrote. But I can't really go on without having just a couple honorable mentions because it's like, well, pick one book of your whole life that you read and talk about it. So I have just 2 honorable mentions. The first one is the Outlander series, right? It's gone on now, they've made it into a TV show or streaming or whatever, but this is a beautifully written series. And I don't normally go for, fantasy, time travel type of things, but it's generally a love story and very historically accurate. It's very well researched. So that's my first honorable mention. The second honorable mention, for those of you who like mysteries, the Macy Dobbs series. The first book, Macy Dobbs, introduces you to the series. Again, beautifully written, the story is woven in and out so beautifully that I really recommend this too. So I couldn't get by with just one book today. I had to, do at least 3, or actually series of books. But we are here to talk about Louis L'Amour, and more specifically, his book, The Walking Drum. And Louis L'Amour, he was born in 1908, died 79 years later in 1988, so almost 80 years old. And if you've heard the name Louis L'Amour, you probably associate it with Western novels. And my goodness, he wrote a lot of Western novels, dozens of Western novels. So we're going to talk not about his Western novels so much today, a little bit, but not totally. But the book that we're really going to concentrate on is going to be The Walking Drum, which is not an American Western novel. It's a 12th century adventure. Well, that's a lot different than an American Western novel. So how did he come to write this book? Why did he write this book? Why is this the book that I picked up all of his books that he wrote? And he wrote over 100 books, and I probably have read 80 of them, I'm guessing. Okay, so I picked one out of the 80 that I read to talk about today. So to get us started, right, it's really important, we need to talk about his life first, because everybody's life, you are a person of your time, right? You are a person of your experiences, and Louis L'Amour is no different. Then we'll talk a little bit about his books in general, then his characters and what types of characters he tends to have in his books. And then finally, we'll talk about The Walking Drum. So his life, right? He was born in 1908 in the town of Jamestown, North Dakota, kind of in the middle of North Dakota, right? 1908. Not a whole lot going on in Jamestown, North Dakota. Well, that's not even true, because it had the railroad going through it, right? And in the early 1900s, the railroad really connected people, connected things. And he was the youngest of 7 children. They weren't rich, they weren't dirt poor, very modest family. His father was a large veterinarian working on large animals. So he wasn't working on Fluffy the cat, right? He was working on farm animals, and that's how he supported his family. Modest house. Out back of this modest house was basically a shack where his grandfather lived. And all the family was very well read. They were just avid readers. There was a free library in town that he spent much of his youth in, reading, all kinds of books, not just fiction books, but nonfiction books, whatever he could get his hands on. His sister was actually the one who taught him to read, although his mother was an avid reader, but his sister taught him to read. And he learned things from his family, right? From his father, he learned all about the ways and wiles of animals, farm animals, stock animals, things like that. He learned the value of good work. From his grandfather was a known storyteller. He had been a soldier, and his grandfather told stories all the time of his soldiering days and of other wars. So Louis was immersed in this environment from a young age of hearing stories. He had 2 uncles that were cowboys. They worked as cowboys. And so then when they would come back to town, they would regale him with these stories. The train comes through Jamestown, and cowboys would be riding the train, and he and his brothers would run to the train, and they would listen to the cowboys talking to each other and listen to their stories. So we see a youth that is has a lot of storytelling around him, has a very big thirst for knowledge, always at the library. And another interesting thing about his family is they adopted a boy from New York City, a street boy. He lived on the streets. So Louis learned from him how to fight, how to be this youngster was a natural born survivor, right? How to survive, how to be self-reliant, that type of thing. He had another brother that was a newspaper man. So in the writing, so he learned the importance of concise and precise writing from his brother. So again, all of these people in his family, born in 1908. He's going to school, a little local school there, and when he gets to be age 15, the economic times turn for the family. The Midwest at this time was in 1923, 24 or so, and banks were failing then. So this is before the big crash of 29, but things are not great in the Midwest. And so the father decides, we can't really stay here in Jamestown anymore. We need to leave. And the way they left was basically piling everything they could in their vehicle, and they take off, the entire family, with no known place to go. So they become kind of wanderers. They travel around and they pick up work wherever they can. The kids, the father, everybody's working, trying to earn a little bit of money. So he ends up, he skins hides in Texas. He works in mines in Nevada. He works in lumber yards in Oregon and Washington. He bales hay in New Mexico. I mean, he just, whatever he could turn his hand to turn a buck to help the family. He actually gets into prize fighting a little bit. He did some professional prize fighting for money. And when he won, they would use the money to put gas in the vehicle so they could move on, right? He said, and this lasted, this itinerary, this traveling around with the family, this lasted 7 years. This wasn't just a 1 or 2 month kind of journey. This was their life. And the whole time, who's he meeting, right? He's meeting miners, and he's meeting loggers, and he's meeting farmers, and he's meeting, all these people. And even after that, he's a man in his 20s, and he's still, even when the family kind of settled down and their fortunes they settled down and they became a little bit better financially, he still goes out and travels around. And he rode the rails for a while. He was a hobo for a while. And he talked to men that had been hobos for 50 years. So, and he's so interested in people. So he strikes up he has these relationships with people. He strikes up these friendships. They might be short-term friendships, but he's just absorbing them. And so when he's by himself, sometimes he would go without eating because he would use his money to buy books. He said when he was about 15 to 30 years old, he read about 150 nonfiction books a year, in addition to fiction books. This is a person that loves to read and is just always searching for knowledge and just loves storytelling. And when he started reading, when he was a young boy, he started writing, of course, because you typically don't write all your life and then start a few years before you die. And of course, he has over 100 books, so he had to start kind of early. His first writing he was drawn to was poetry. Loved poetry. He didn't have any formal education in it, though, so it didn't come easily to him, but he really loved it. And he had a very, very small success with selling some of his poems to magazines. But that didn't pan out very well. What the magazines were really looking for were short adventure stories. So he had all of this fodder, right? He had been around the country. In fact, he had been around the world. On some of his travels, he had become a merchant seaman, and he had gone to the South Seas. Gathering stories. So he starts writing some adventure stories and has a little bit of luck with that. World War II comes along, right? He was born in 1908, so we're talking, he was in his 30s. He went into the Army, and he was posted in Europe, and he did trucking, right? Moving goods around. And so he saw some of Europe that way, met a lot of people, gathered more stories. And when he came back, the adventure story for magazines had kind of dried up. He had had some success before the war, but after the war, he wasn't really able to make it. But what they really wanted were mysteries and Westerns. And he said, I can do Westerns because I've spent a lot of my life out in the West. I've heard stories, my grandfather and that type of thing, done a lot of reading. So he started writing short stories, Westerns, for magazines. And he had quite a bit of luck with that. And then he thought, well, I'm having some luck with these short stories. He started writing novels, a little bit longer stories. His Western novels are not typically really long novels. They're the types of things that you literally could read in a day if you're motivated. So, and he had more luck with that. And then one of his books, Hondo, one of the film companies picked up, and they made a film of it. And he is made, right? Louis L'Amour has become a name because now he has a book that has been turned into a movie. So that just skyrockets his career as far as writing. So let's just look a little bit some of his books, right? I love the cover art on fiction books, on paperback fiction books. Sometimes you can tell that the artist didn't actually read the book, but by and large, it gives you kind of an idea of, right, what the book is about. The cover art generally on his Westerns, right, has a man holding a gun, okay, because that's kind of what his books are. So I love the cover art. This is one more slide of this. This is the same book, The Burning Hills, and we see like the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, modern, because it's still in print, right? Modern, how it looks. So you can see how the cover art kind of changes throughout the decades. And we could spend a whole hour just talking about cover art for paperback books. That's a whole nother niche subject in itself. But I wanted to show you just kind of how his books have been depicted, and their cover art is a good way to show that. Okay, so he's in the 1950s, he's writing these books, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, into the 1980s. He dies in 1988, very prolific, keeps, putting them out. And not all his books are not separate, standalone. You can read them standalone, but a lot of his books are series or connected with characters, right? A couple of them, the Sackett series, I don't even know how many books he has Sacketts in. There's so many cousins and uncles and sons and grandfathers, all the Sackett clan, shall we say, right? And I've got a quote here, right? How many are there? The Sacketts, I mean. Nobody rightly knows, but even one Sackett is quite a few. This really tells us what his books are, right? His books are typically about a man, a lot of times kind of a loner, but has these friends or relatives like the Sacketts that come to his aid when he needs it. They are strong men, right? They are not eager to fight, but willing to fight. They're righteous men. They're looking for justice, right? They're for the underdog. So that's one of the series. Another really popular series in his, I won't even call it this isn't so much a Western. This series actually starts in Europe, comes to the New World, right? We're the New World, and is more in the frontier. But again, we've got this whole family that we have a series of books. I would not have the old ways die, for all people in their own way find a path to wisdom. Each way can be a good way. Each has something to offer the world. I like this series because it makes us think about where we have come from or where our ancestors have come from. What did they find important? What have we learned from them as a family or as our clan or as our society? And I think these are a little bit more these aren't just the dime novels, right? These are a little bit more intricate, a little bit more interwoven with some reflection back. So I think as he writes, in the 50s and the 1960s and the 1970s and the 1980s, we can see a progression with his writing where he gets to be more of, not, I won't say preachy, but he wants to tell the reader some wisdoms that he has found out in his life, and he wants to pass those on. So now we come to his unfinished series, right? The book we're going to talk about today, The Walking Drum, was actually going to be one of three, one of a trilogy, right? So we have The Walking Drum. It was published in 1984. He dies in 1988. Two unfinished books, right? Woman Worth Having and May There Be a Road. Oh, how I wish he would have written those books, right? Because as you read The Walking Drum, you get to the end, and it does have an end, it has a conclusion, but boy, you think, wow, I could sure use that next book to take this on to the next step. So this is actually a series book that we're talking about, and we just have only the first third. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the characters in his book and what types of characters. These are all from cover art. These pictures are all from cover art. Generally, right? The main character is male. Righteous man, knows right from wrong, wants to do right, willing to help others do right, willing to face evil, right? Just strong characters. We'll talk about the women characters in a moment. Here's a good quote, right? This is from one of the Sackett books, right? There was that Texas Ranger, McDonald, who said, "There's no stopping a man who knows he's right and keeps a comin'," right? That's a Louis L'Amour character, main character. Knows he's right and keeps a comin', right? You might push him down, but he's gonna get back up. Because if he sees an injustice, he wants to right it. Another thing that I really like about Louis L'Amour books is they don't have profanity in them, so they're clean, good family books. Yes, they have violence in them, but generally the violence is trying to right a wrong, right? Working for the underdog, seeing an injustice righted, that type of thing. Here's another quote that would be about a main character in Louis L'Amour book. The man would charge into hell with a bucket of water, right? Not afraid to do what it needs to get done, no matter the price to himself, no matter what might happen. So let's just get back to characters for just a moment and talk about women in his books. There are typically women in his books. They are not the main character. They can be a fairly strong supporting character. A lot of his Westerns, they might be a love interest, but that's not the sole thing that's happening in the book, right? Sometimes you might call them a love story, but that's kind of the underlying thing. His Westerns especially are adventure, but they will have women. And the cover art shows that. The cover art generally will have the man, the main character, and they might have a woman. So this brings us finally, right, to the book we're going to talk about today, which is The Walking Drum. 12th century adventure and love story. Now, how does Louis L'Amour go from writing Westerns to writing this story? Well, you have to remember, when did he write this story? It was published in 1984, 4 years before he died. He's in his 70s. He's written all of these books. He has this knowledge, this wisdom, all of these stories that he's collected for decades upon decades, for 70 years. And I think he said to himself, you know what? I'm going to write what I want to write. I've got the name. Any publisher is going to publish my book, so I'm going to write what I want to write. He's so well read himself, right? He knows about Europe. And he's been to Europe. And this was a time that intrigued him, this 12th century, right? We have feudalism going. We have merchants, traveling merchants. We have all kinds of religious conflicts going. Just a really interesting time in history. So he comes up with this story. And this is the cover art on the book that I read, the book that I have at home, The Walking Drum. And the picture, right, depicts Kerbushar, that's his name, Kerbushar. But I think that shows him older than he would be in the book, right? From reading the book, I get the sense that he's a young man. I mean, this is not an old man, but it's not a young man, like a 20-year-old man, right? So Kerbushar, I picture as younger than this, but very much looking like this. Very strong, right? Good with the sword, righteous man, hasn't lost that, right? From those Westerns, we're still going to get this in this book. This is what I picture him to be looking more like. A little bit younger, a little bit more innocent looking, you know, not weathered yet, hasn't been tried, hasn't had a lot of adverse things happen to him. So I think this is probably how he looks at the beginning of the book. Okay. Lessons from the walking drum, right? You know what? Not quite there. Not quite there. Sorry. Let's just talk about him for a little bit more. He is born on the western edge of present-day France, Brittany, France. His father, also called Kerbushard, in fact, Kerbushar, right, because his father is famous or infamous, maybe, as a pirate. I mean, this is when people hear the name Kerbushar, they shake in their boots because his father is well known and well feared. So here's the young Kerbushar, and he's been raised how to sword fight, how to be self-reliant, how to depend on himself, how to survive, basically. And the book starts that his mother has just been murdered. His father, he has word that his father has been kidnapped. He's alone in the world. So here's this young man, has these skills, but not really tested, right? Has these skills, has no one left. His quest, because all good adventure novels need a quest, right? His quest is to set out, find, and free his father. And he's not even sure. He has some inklings, right? Some people have kind of hinted at where he might be, his father might be. But he doesn't, know. It's not like he's a mile down the road kidnapped. He's, across Europe kidnapped type of thing. So he sets out on this quest, and Louis takes us through this quest. So now let's look at the lessons that we can have from the walking drum. There's 5. Lesson number 1, exploration and adventure. That's part of what this book is, a big part of what this book is. The adventures that he finds along the way on his quest, right? The exploration. Here's a map of 12th century Europe, or 12th century world. Okay, countries look a little bit different than we're used to. So here's a map that looks more familiar to us, right? Present day Europe and part of Asia. And I've put stars on the locations, the important locations that Kerbushar travels to or travels through, or important things happen to him in these locations. And for the 12th century, right, we're talking 1100s, he's pretty well traveled during this book, right? You don't just hop on a train and go there. You go there by horse, you go there by foot type of thing. So he starts out, right, in France, and he makes his way down into the Mediterranean, and he ends up in Andalusia, or southern Spain. The Moors are there, right? It's Islam is there. And he makes his way then up into France, across Europe, to present-day Ukraine, down to the Black Sea, crosses the Black Sea to present-day Istanbul, right? Crosses the Black Sea again, goes through the Caucasus, the mountains there, and makes his way finally down into the deserts, into modern day Iran. So this covers a lot of territory, and it covers some time. We're not given the specific times that it covers, like is it one, and it's much more than 1 year. I'm thinking, minimum 5 years for all these things that happen to him as he goes on the way. So he's, maybe starts out when he's about 18, 20, so he's in his 20s when that happens. Now, in the introduction, you heard that my husband and I love to travel. So, and books can be an inspiration, right, in a lot of different areas in our life. So we love to travel. So we look at a map like this and we're like, well, we want to go there and there and there and there and there and there, right? We want to go everywhere. So we have made it to these places, right? We've made it to Andalusia, and in the book, in Cordoba, I believe, there's a mosque that is still there. Talks about the mosque, and there's a grove of oranges in the court of the mosque there. And so we've been there, right? And the orange trees are still growing there. Paris, where he travels because he's after things. He's always looking for his father, but he's also looking for scholars, right, so that he can learn things. So the left bank of Paris, Provence nearby, where there are underground tunnels that he goes through in the book that are very important in the book. So my husband and I traveled there and we went on a tour of the underground tunnels. So Louis has done his research. These are real places that he talks about, right? Places, if they're still there, that you can go and visit. So those are the places we've been, right? These are the places we have not been. Now, unfortunately, a number of these places, we as Americans cannot get there for one reason or another, either war, or you just, like the State Department is on the level 4, do not travel to Iran type of thing. So that's unfortunate, but there's a few more places, the Caucasus, the mountains there, central Spain. There's a few more places that we can still visit that are on our walking drum adventure itinerary. Okay, lesson 2, resilience and determination. All right, let me just do a couple quotes here, or a quote, right? The past is the past, and we cannot change the choices we've made, but we can choose today to be better, to do better. And in the darkest times, hope is the light that guides us forward. This is Louis L'Amour, right? In his 70s, giving us his wisdom through this book, through the characters in this book. Right? We've got resilience and determination. So Kerbyshard, he goes through all of these trials and tribulations, picks himself up, dusts himself off, and keeps going. Right? We can't change what happened yesterday, but I can go forward and I can do the best that I can. That's what the book tells me. Okay, third lesson, cultural exchange and tolerance. Okay, we are all connected like threads in a grand tapestry. What we do to others, we also do to ourselves. This is the golden rule, right? So, and that's, Kerbyshard comes to realize, right, that everything that he does, comes back to him. And what I especially like about this book is how it deals with religion. Now, Kerbyshard is raised pagan, right? That's his religion. But he meets, right, people in Christianity, Islam, Judaism. He meets all of these different people along the way. And he has a great respect for all of their religions. He's not looking to convert, but he's looking to learn, right? It's almost like he sits down and, please tell me about your religion. I'm very interested in your religion. And so you actually learn a lot about 12th century religion from this book of these 4 different types. Lesson 4, knowledge and education. There is a power in knowledge, but there is freedom in understanding. Kerbyshard, I think, is a lot like Louis L'Amour. I think Louis saw himself in this character, always seeking out scholarship, right? One place he goes in the book is Paris, and this is a young Paris. This is, 1100s Paris. So he seeks out the wise men, right, who to study with. So here's a depiction, right, the wise man discussing philosophy, discussing maybe mathematics, discussing things with his students. So Kerbuchard spends time as a student, not just in Paris, but in other places too. So this is all interwoven, right, with the adventures and the moving around and his underlying quest to find his father. So we learn a lot about society, right, and how education was in the 12th century. And lastly, right, lesson 5 is on love and relationships. And this is a long book. This is not one of his short westerns, right? This is a long book. And it meanders through a number of characters, men and women. We have Aziza. That's really the first woman character that we're introduced to. And he learns from her, he helps her, he helps rescue her, right? She's taken aboard a slave ship and he helps to rescue her and to get her where she needs to go. Sophia, Suzanne, these are other women that come into his life for a while, and he might travel with them for a while, but he normally is helping them in some way. They might be teaching him things, but he's also helping them. The last woman character, the Sundari, he falls in love with. I mean, he falls in love with, right? And remember, what's the second title of this trilogy of books? A Woman Worth Having, right? I can only think that that's probably Sundari's story along with him, right? Because she comes in not at the beginning of the book, but rather near the end of the book. The men, there always has to be at least one really kind of evil man, right? And Mahmoud takes care of that in spades. They start out by friends, they have a falling out, and they really become enemies. And loyal Khatib comes in and out of the story, but he's always there when he's needed. I'd like to end with a quote, and since I'm a woman, I'm going to end with a quote that's kind of about women from The Walking Drum. Women have treated me well, bless their souls, and it has occurred to me that a man need know but 2 sentences to survive. The first to ask for food, the second to tell a woman he loves her. If he must dispense with one or the other, by all means, let it be the first, for surely if you tell a woman you love her, she will feed you. Okay, that's Kerbuchard, as he's learned from all his dealings through this book. Okay, thank you very much, and have some discussion.
Thank you, Susan. If you have any questions, ask that you use the microphone so we can let the people online also hear.
Was that his real name, or was that a pen name?
No, that was it wasn't his real name, and now you've got me on the spot. I can't, and some of you Louis L'Amour fans probably remember his actual real name. It was L'Amour, but it was spelled differently. So this was not his pen name, but it's the name that he went by for most of his life.
Susan, you mentioned getting started reading them through your husband-to-be at the time. But with that many books, what kept you reading? I mean, what is it in the quintessential Louis L'Amour book that just you can't stop finding out about? What is it that really speaks to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like his Westerns, they are uplifting, right? Because they usually end well. They have a really strong, righteous character. So you feel you have someone that you can really, root for. Like, yeah, that's great. And it comes out well in the end. It's not unlike, a romance novel that ends well, right? It's a Western that ends well. So I think that it leads you to reading more and more and more.
So I've seen the film Hondo. How close is the novel to the film Hondo?
Actually, I've never seen the film Hondo, so I cannot tell you that. Sorry. That would be a good one. Have you seen the film?
Yes.
Okay, well, how close is it to the novel then? Oh, you haven't read the novel. Okay, well then we're both in the same boat, I think.
I'll end with this one. If you could write the 2 books that follow, what would you have happen after The Walking Drum?
Oh, well, that's a really hard question. I'll answer that by thinking that I've always thought that once I found out that it was the first of a trilogy, I always thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if someone would write those last 2 books? But what would happen? Well, the second story would definitely be about the last woman, that Sundari, and how they actually can't seem to get together, but finally get together in the end. That would be the second book.
A lot of authors have had their series just picked up by other people. Sons have written in Tolkien, and they've farmed out, I don't know how many people who've written Bond books. Why do you think they haven't had anybody continue his line, or do you know if they have? Is there something about his writing that you would say is unique?
Right, that's an interesting question too, because I even researched, like, did someone write them? Because, you know, even, like, Gone with the Wind has a sequel by someone else. You know, they do that all the time. You know, that I don't know, because you would think it would be very marketable, because a Louis L'Amour sequel, you know, based on that first book. So there you go, Maureen. There's your
Public domain. No.
Oh, yeah. Well, that could be it too, maybe.
Susan, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.